All right, folks, welcome to the first ever digitaloffroad.com post-race show. We're here at the Unadilla Valley Sports Center for round 10 of the Can-Am GNCC series. I'm Jason Hooper here with my good buddy Rodney Royce the Voice Tomblin. Rodney, you know, there's two things we can pretty much guarantee when we come to upstate New York for the Unadilla GNCC. That there's a pretty good chance we're going to get some rain, and that Nate Canny is going to be on the gas.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it, and you could only expect that coming into Unadilla this year, Jason, because after the win at Snowshoe, obviously Nate had a lot of fire under him, and he was ready to roll. He rolled into the summer break, and he had one thing in mind after that win at Snowshoe, and that was to come here to Unadilla and take a win. I know whenever I talked to him earlier this morning, the idea that he had was, I want to go out, I want to stretch things out, and I want to totally make this the most boring race that you guys have ever watched. He kind of did that. The only unfortunate thing is that he could not shake Jimmy Jarrett right from the get-go.
Yeah, it was a pretty crazy race. It was crazy the way things got sorted out. You know, lots of things that you wouldn't have expected. And one of those things coming in this race that you probably would have never expected is that Jason Thomas, who was in second place in points behind Caleb Russell in the XC2 class, switched to a Husqvarna. Yeah,
I know, and that's something that you wouldn't expect to happen, especially with the success that we've seen him have on the Yamaha over the course of the last few years. And, you know, to make that switch is one thing, but to make that switch in the middle of the season with a championship points race on the line like that, you know, he had to be feeling pretty confident in that new bike.
Yeah, and he actually was, and we caught up with him before the race started, so let's go down and check out that interview with Jason Thomas before the race got underway. All right, we're down here in the Fred Andrews Racing Monster Energy pits with Jason Thomas, and definitely had some big changes over the summer, some big things happening. The first thing, you won that championship up in Canada. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, you know, I went up to Canada and decided I was going to race that championship during the summer break instead of taking a break, and it turned out good for me. I won every race up there and managed to win the championship with 3 rounds to go, so that was good.
So you've been switching back and forth between the Yamaha and the KTM racing up there, and now obviously you're making another big switch to the Husky. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, you know, I've been switching backwards and forwards between the Yamaha and the KTM, and that really hasn't affected me. And now we've changed from a 2-stroke to a 4-stroke, and personally I think I'm a better 4-stroke rider than I am a 2-stroke rider. So I'm happy with the change and really happy with the way the bike runs. So hopefully we can have a good day today.
All right, what made you guys decide to make that switch? I mean, I know, are you a little bit nervous coming into this? You know, you're pretty close to that, wrapping that, being able to get that championship and then make a switch like that. I mean, it had to have been for a pretty big reason, I'd say.
I'm not real nervous about it. I mean, I haven't really quit riding. So in years past, I've quit riding over the summer break and come back after the summer break and not really been sure what I'm going to be like. This time it's different. I've been riding all summer. I know how I'm riding, and you know, I'm confident coming into it. I personally was never happy on the 2-stroke. I mean, I've had good rides on it, but I never was really comfortable on the 2-stroke. I always wanted to switch back, and now we've got an opportunity with Husqvarna, so you know, hopefully it can make it work.
All right, so is this maybe a sign of things to come for you next year? Is there you guys working on something maybe for the 2011 season on the Husky?
Hopefully, for sure. I haven't heard anything yet, but maybe we can get it on the podium and try and seal the deal for next year.
All right, well, good luck out there, man.
Thank you.
All right, now let's head down to the start and watch how it all unfolded.
Yeah, in the XC1 class, you know, it's kind of a guess who's going to get the whole shot. There hasn't been a consistent, you know, guy that's just nailing them week after week. You know, and in this race, it was Eric Bailey grabbing his first ever XC1 pro whole shot.
Yeah, I know, and Eric Bailey has been so close so many times this year, and unfortunately for Eric, he had some problems where he literally had injured his elbow, and he had elbow surgery, and he actually had to set out a race or two, and he had a long time to sit and think about things over the course of this summer break.
But yeah, it wasn't long before some of the big names in the XC1 class were making their way around him, and they were going at it pretty hard.
Yeah, they were, and you know, it was the basic and classic freight train that you see at a GNCC when things get underway. Those first few miles, you know, especially, you know, the first 3 miles, I think it was pretty much pick and choose, and it was a waiting game. See who was going to try to push to the front of the pack. One of the riders that was pushing to the front of the pack was Canny. Canny didn't get off to the best of starts. He maybe didn't have a bad start, but he had fallen back to about 6th place there in the early part of that first lap and even into the second lap. And as they were making their way around, eventually it just seemed like something clicked there in Nathan. He methodically started picking people off, and before you know it, Nathan was out front, and he was in position to do exactly what he said he wanted to do, and that was to pull away from the rest of the field.
Yeah, you really thought that was probably going to be what would happen. It's like when Nate gets out front here, he wins. It's just one of those things. But man, Jimmy Jarrett, just out of nowhere, guy's been battling a shoulder injury all year long, just kept him honest the whole race, and you know, got to the point where he was, kind of waiting for that mistake, and eventually it did happen.
Yeah, it eventually did happen, and the way things were looking, it wasn't going to happen there at one point. I mean, as much pressure as Jimmy Jarrett was putting on Nate Canny, he'd make a pass here, he'd make a pass there, He was in the lead a couple of times, but every time that he would make the pass, Canny would pass right back on him and regain the lead. There at one point, we saw a little bit of a stretch start to take place, and that was in the final laps as we were heading toward the finish. The checkers and, Nate Canny's out front. He's starting to amass a little bit of a lead. Jimmy, I don't know whether he's beginning to tire or what the case may be, but all of a sudden, by Nate's admission, he made a big mistake out there. He went down because of a lapped rider, trying to put a lapped rider between himself and Jimmy. That was the mistake that Jimmy Jarrett was waiting on, and he blew on by, and he never looked back.
No, that's exactly right. I guess that's the veteran in Jimmy Jarrett. He's not 100% healthy. He's close enough that he can race hard, and he saw that opportunity. He took it, he got by Nate, and he did not look back.
And an amazing thing about Jimmy Jarrett, too, that I want to point out is the endurance that rider showed. In previous races this year, and I think a lot of it had to do with the shoulder, Jimmy's been really strong up to the 2-hour mark. It's the third hour that seemed to always be the failing point for Jimmy Jarrett. But today, that was not the case. And, I asked Jimmy on the podium about his training regimen over the summer, and he says, I basically did nothing. I just basically sat around, let the shoulder heal because I wanted to be as close to 100% healthy as far as physically in that department when I headed back. And he wasn't too worried necessarily about the conditioning. He figured that would be something that would come a little later on. He just wanted to be healthy, and fortunately for him, everything clicked. I mean, you had perfect weather conditions here. Yeah, we had the rain, but the rain is not as bad this year as what it has been in years past. It was actually perfect for the conditions that we had, dry soil and everything, made the track really good. There was a couple of slick spots, but all in all, it made for the best racing surface I think we've seen here at Unadilla so far.
Yeah, it was pretty good. Another one that was surprising we saw there was Thad Duvall actually finishing the race.
Yeah.
He was in the battle for quite some time. It was him and Bach, and in the early stages, we had Charlie Mullins up there before he ran into some bike problems and had to have an extended pit stop. And then, with Josh Strang got in the mix, and Strang and Duvall were going at it pretty good. Bach kind of ended up in that little bit of a no man's land. He kind of fell off the pace there of Nate and Jimmy Jarrett, and Bach was kind of alone there in third, but that battle for fourth and fifth was pretty good too. Yeah, you got to think for Thad, he just really needs to start stringing some solid finishes. But for Josh Strang, usually I don't think he'd be very happy with the fourth place finish. But, I think Charlie ended up.
He was running. I know he was battling for at least 10th place there at one point, and
that's points.
That is a lot of points to give up there. Leading into today's race, I talked with Rodney Smith and I talked with Josh Strang both. Rodney Smith told me the advice that he gave to Josh Strang is, don't worry about anybody else on the track. No one else out there matters for this championship. The only person that you're racing out there right now is Charlie Mullins, and that's the guy that you got to worry about beating. And I think that's the mindset that Josh took into this race. Normally we would see Josh pushing as hard as he could possibly push there in the last hour of the race to try to work up to the front of the pack and take away the win if he wasn't in position early in the race. Today, we didn't so much see that. We saw a rider settle in to protect a points lead and going after that championship. He rode a very smart race. All the while, Charlie Mullins had dropped back to about an 18th place position early in the race, had worked his way up into a top 10. So Charlie could have lost a lot more than what he did today. Fortunately for him, he was able to make that push, and he still might see a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel with 3 races to go.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if we're at the Ironman and we still don't know who's going to be the champ. I think it's going to be a really, really good race, and it's exciting. In another class, obviously the XC2 class, we have no idea what's going to happen in that class. I mean, it is unpredictable as it can get. We know that there's a couple guys that are usually going to be on top, but how they get there is, it's your guess as good as mine.
Yeah, the big story in that XC2 Pro Lights class the other day, Jason, was the breakaway run that we've seen by Jason Thomas and Caleb Russell. I mean, those two, another phenomenal knockdown, drag-out battle. It was Russell starting to stretch things out a little bit there at one point, and then I guess he said he was getting a little too comfortable, and those guys started catching up, and he made some mistakes of his own.
Yeah, at the beginning of the race, I was thinking, this is exactly why I thought Jason Thomas shouldn't ride a Husqvarna. It doesn't start. Caleb Russell gets awesome starts on his KTM, and he gets a second-place start. Before you know it, he's 30, 40 seconds out in front, and Jason's working his way through the pack. And I'm like, well, it was a mistake.
Yep.
But, that's why they run the races, because there's no guarantees, right? And Jason worked his way up. Caleb ended up having a pretty big crash back on the U2 track, busted his visor off and stuff. So that pushed him back, and it started to look to me like Caleb had, just kind of, all right, it's going to be a second place today, because Jason started to pull away.
Yeah, there was 43 seconds that separated those two with 2 laps to go. When they came through with the white flag, Caleb had pulled to within 9 seconds. Now, grant you, Jason had a pretty bad crash just before the finish line. Said he knocked himself pretty loopy, and when he got up, it took him a couple of seconds to regain his bearings, but he came across the finish line. Russell had pulled to within 10 seconds in that 9-second range there, and it was on from then on out. I mean, that last lap between Russell and Thomas was just unbelievable, and it came all the way to the checkers.
Yeah, I mean, it really did. When they came onto the motocross track with just less than a half a mile left in the entire race, and there was some some contact was made. Depending on who you talk to, the stories vary. I've heard 5 different people that saw the same thing, or said they saw the same thing, and they all have a little bit different take on it. Things get rubbin's racing.
Yep.
And things definitely get tight when we've got championship on the line, and those guys are in a very big championship battle. They had 5 points is a big thing right
especially
now.
with 3 races to go. And yeah, both these guys very high on adrenaline. Both these guys very aggressive as far as the riding style is concerned. Again, I don't know if it was an over aggressive move, but I think what it was basically exactly what you say. 2 guys fighting for a championship, and unfortunately maybe Jason got the short end of the stick on that one, but you can't take away from what Caleb Russell was able to achieve there, making up that 43 seconds in those last 2 laps. And as they came through the finish line, like you said, a little controversy, a little push and shove match going on there. Hopefully they'll get that all sorted out, but I think what that does, Jason, is lights a fire for when we head to Tennessee. That is only going to make that race that much better.
Well, that just shows you exactly how much these guys want it.
Yep.
Caleb wants it bad enough where he feels like, he needs those points, and he's going to have to make a run in on it. And Jason Thomas wants it bad enough when he gets that 5 points taken away that he's going to let Caleb know that he wasn't happy about it. And I think you can't ask for much more than that. 2 guys that just want to win more than anything. So, hopefully, things remain civil for the remaining rounds and it doesn't turn into some kind of takeout fest. But
right.
I think cooler heads will prevail.
Yeah.
In the heat of the moment, you can't blame a guy for being a little upset and showing his emotion. You like to see that he wants it bad enough. I would have been disappointed in Jason Thomas if he had rolled through the finish line and just acted like it was no big deal.
Yeah.
You want him to be mad that he lost that race, and you want Caleb to want it bad enough that he's going to go for it. So that's the way I see it anyway.
Point well taken, man. Like I say, I cannot wait for these next 3 races. And like you say, I think this is another one. I think both the XC1 and the XC2 are going to come right down to Indiana. It's going to be exciting.
I can't wait. I can't wait till the next round. It sucks that it's 2 weeks away. I was kind of wishing we had one of those back-to-back races like we did last year so we could get back at it. But I guess that's pretty much it here from Unadilla Valley Sports Center. We'll catch you guys next week, in 2 weeks for the next round from Tennessee.
Yep. And it's only going to get better, folks. Only going to get better.
Yeah, that's right. So for Rodney Tomblin, I'm Jason Hooper. We're signing off. We'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks.